Welcome to the Storyfield. This is a podcast created and sponsored by the Allen Firm. This is Josh Allen, and I'm joined by Micah Petrie. I think you'll agree that life is complex, business is hard, and living a life of faith can feel complicated. We know it's discouraging when movement in your life or business or faith has stopped. Well, you're in the right place to hear some great stories of normal people just like us who will inspire you to move forward in life. So thank you for joining us today. We know you're going to be encouraged.
All right, hey friends, welcome to the Storyfield. We are ecstatic of our guest today. One of my friends, Miss Jenifer Sarver. Man, she's done so much, does so many things. I can't even list them all. Josh is going to try. So Josh, tell us a little bit more about Miss Sarver.
Oh yeah, today's going to be awesome. I'm super excited too, because I think we're going to learn a lot. But if you do follow politics, you may recognize Jenifer's name. So Jenifer ran for United States Congress in the 2018 primary election. Now we're going to hit on some of these things, but I'm going to give some bullet points. Jenifer, you were a speechwriter for the Republican National Convention in 2008 and 2012. You were on the task force that was deployed a few times. I think it was 2004 and again in 2008 for the Republican National Convention, for one to help George W. Bush and one for the Ohio congressional races. So you appear to be the most incredible volunteer of your time. I count at least 5 boards right now and many organization memberships and probably a relentless volunteer. So, and then kind of most recently in 2014, you formed the founder of Sarver Strategies, which is a strategic communications consultancy. And you help corporate, nonprofits, political clients just to develop and share their story, which I'm fascinated about. So we're going to get into all this stuff. So thank you for being here and making time. We are honored.
Hey guys, well, thanks so much for having me. It's a privilege to join you for this conversation. There are only a few things in which I am an expert of. I am an expert in myself. So always happy to tell a little bit about my story, right?
Well, we like to kind of get a time frame just on just to set some history with people. So where did you grow up and where did you do your childhood?
So I grew up in the Rio Grande Valley, South Texas, right? So I grew up on the Mexican border and was a wonderful childhood. I had a really blessed and privileged childhood. Parents that love me, 3 younger siblings, brothers who I adore. And, growing up in South Texas was a really unique experience in many ways. I don't think I fully appreciated it at the time that we were 15 minutes from Mexico, an hour and a half from the beach. I was raised by a minister and an educator. My parents met in Bible school, actually. And they really instilled in us just a love of people and a love of service from early on. So my whole childhood is marked by volunteering and serving and going to church 3 to 5 times a week. And I was also homeschooled for a long time. So I was raised at home with my brothers, with my parents. We spent a lot of time with each other. They didn't allow us to fight, so we just figured we'd get along. And my brothers are my best friends today. So I loved growing up in South Texas. All my cousins, aunts, and uncles are down there. So we had a big, joyful family full of lots of adventure. My dad was a minister, so we didn't make much money. So we did fun things like camping, which I thought made us really adventurous. It wasn't until later in life I realized that camping was free versus a hotel room. But I got to travel a lot throughout the country. Didn't travel a lot internationally when I was young. I've since made up for that as I've grown older. I have this wanderlust that makes me want to explore. But growing up in South Texas, surrounded by family, surrounded by love, surrounded by church.
Yeah, what a blessing to have that as your childhood. Did you guys go over to Mexico often?
Yeah, pretty frequently. I mean, I always tell this story that, we go across for lunch or dinner periodically. For my high school prom, we went to dinner in Mexico and then came back across for prom. When I was a freshman in high school, I actually went to a private school where a lot of my fellow classmates came across the border every day. And so there were times when class would start late because the border was backed up. And I had friends that I would go spend the weekend in Mexico with. And so I'd drive home with them on Fridays. And then on Sunday, my parents would be like, okay, meet us at the border at 2. And I'd walk across the bridge and meet my parents, which is just so funny to think about now. The border's not quite as safe as it was at that point in time. But I just loved the opportunity to grow up with Latin culture and really, I should be fluent in Spanish. I'm not quite fluent, but I do consider myself culturally Hispanic because I grew up in South Texas and so many of my friends and family members are Mexican.
Yeah.
So which of your brothers is your favorite?
Mm.
You're
It
gonna
depends
get her in trouble off the bat.
No, yeah, this is a running joke in my family, right? My brother Justin is my favorite brother. But if Jason is here, he is my favorite brother. And if Jonathan walks into the room, he's my favorite
I
brother.
get you. So
So
whoever is closest
whoever's
is,
closest,
yeah.
we're all Jays, as you can tell. And the cool thing is each one of them have lived with me as adults. And so that has really forged a bond that I don't think a lot of people get. Justin graduated from college and then moved to Washington, D.C. and lived with me for a couple of years. And that was a really neat experience. And then Jason moved into D.C. and lived with me for a couple of years. And then when I came back to Austin, Jonathan was just graduating from UT. And when he graduated from UT, he moved in with me. And so the opportunity to live with your siblings as adults is really different than when you're kids. I mean, Jonathan is 12 years younger than me. So I was always so much older that we didn't really form much of a friendship or a bond until much later in life. And so we have a lot of fun. We see each other all the time. Jonathan's car is parked in my driveway right now because he's in Alabama. Jason stopped by yesterday on the way to the airport before he flew to California. And Justin's staying with me right now because he's in town visiting. So we are in constant communication, which is a real privilege.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I was really just gonna say that because we've known each other a minute, and every time I see your social media posts and you're with your family, it's like big smiles and fun, and I figured I would try to cause a little bit of trouble, but good maneuvering. And I guess that's why you're really good at what you do.
It's all about how you frame it, Mike.
Yeah, we're gonna get into that, Micah.
Okay.
Well, and that brings up a point too. I'm glad you mentioned the family. So how did, looking back, was there anything particular that you say like caused like our bond like that? I mean, there's a lot of great families with a lot of great connections, but that's pretty unique. It seems like your situation between you and your siblings.
I think it is unique. And I've come to realize that more and more that so few people are actually close to their siblings as adults. They see their siblings once or twice a year, and I'm in daily communication with my brothers. I do think being homeschooled was a big part of it. So there were 12 total years that my mom taught kids at home. And over the last year of the pandemic, everybody's been stressed out about teaching their kids at home. And I thought, my mom did this for 12 years before the internet. So imagine like teaching your kids at home. And we had a classroom, like she was pretty strict. We had a classroom, we had chairs, we had a blackboard. We started school every day at 8 a.m. Like she was pretty strict about it. So it was pretty regimented. But that bond, like when I think back to, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth grade, my teacher was the same person and my classmates were the same three people, right? So we spent a lot of time together. And the cool thing about homeschooling was we could leave in the middle of the day or leave in the middle of the school year and go on a trip. So we would drive to Colorado, we'd drive to Washington State. We had a lot of adventures in that way. And so I think that time together was really, really special. Also, my mom came from a big family that was pretty close, and my dad came from a really broken home, and he was not close to his siblings. And so we saw the example of, as adults, how different those two experiences can be. And they just encouraged us to love on each other and support each other and recognize that these are going to be our friends for life and that we were supposed to be in each other's corner. And I try to instill that same thing in my nieces and nephews now, like, hey, these are your people for the rest of your life. These are your people. And I think too often families don't instill that recognition, that support network. I mean, there's something about having a family. It's a support network for you. And in anything you want to do, you mentioned I ran for office, like my family was there supporting me. In my business adventures, my family's been there supporting me. And so I think from an early age, we were taught to support and encourage one another. And that was an important value that my parents instilled in us.
Yeah, and let that be a reminder to families with kids at home, just the importance of keeping them together too, and just the fighting for those quality times, because obviously it'll impact you your entire life.
Yeah, and I mentioned it earlier, but that my parents didn't let us fight. I think sometimes people say like, "Oh, siblings aren't going to get along, or kids are going to be rebellious. They're going to fight with one another." And those things manifest themselves, right? If you tell your kids, "Well, their brothers and sisters are always going to fight like cats and dogs," that'll happen. We literally were not allowed to fight. We got in trouble if we fought, so we just decided to be friends. It was easier. It was a path of
Oh, that's
resistance.
great. That's good. Well, so and I appreciate you being, open and authentic. And I wanted to ask you, we had talked a little bit before, but you lost your mother, and I just think there's some people who can be encouraged by the story, kind of what you went through. But can you tell us about that as much as
Absolutely.
you're comfortable with?
Yeah, no problem. I'm happy to talk about my mom. One of the ways I keep her alive is by talking about her. So, on June 12th, so just in a few weeks here, it'll be 13 years that we lost her. She was killed in a car accident, 8 o'clock in the morning on the way to work. She was a principal of a private Christian school, and she was driving to work. She was wearing red flip flops and a red beaded necklace. And I know she was drinking a cup of coffee and singing praise and worship music because that's what she did every morning. And she was on her way to the school to meet a family that was trying to enroll their kids for the next year, and she was hit head on by a reckless 16-year-old driver. And I envisioned her singing and worshiping 1 second in the car, and then singing and worshiping the next minute in heaven.
Yeah.
I was in Washington, D.C. at the time. My dad and my brother Jason were also in D.C. with me because it was about near Father's Day time. So dad had come up to spend Father's Day with us. And I was at an event. At that time, I was working in the Bush administration for the Secretary of Commerce. And I was at an event with the secretary. And all of a sudden, I recognized that my BlackBerry was blowing up. And it was like messages for me to call the office. And I called the office and they said, you need to call your brother. Something's happened. And so I called my brother, and Jason was just weeping so hard he couldn't even speak to me. My dad got on the phone and he said, Jenny, your mother was in a car wreck and died. Your mother is dead. And my life changed dramatically in that moment. And I hailed a cab, got in a cab, went back to the office, called my team into the office and said, my mother was just killed. I'm going to get on a plane. I'm going to go home. But here are the things that we need to get done in the office. And my boss came in. He said, what are you doing? I was like, I had to get everything organized so that I could like move on because I didn't know how long I was going to be home. And he's like, we will take care of everything. Get out of here. And so somebody from the office drove me home, got to my house. Friends came over to my house to unpack my refrigerator. I mean, the things that make people think of in the moment, like, we don't want you to come home in a couple weeks to bad food in the fridge. So we're going to unpack your refrigerator. They came over, they prayed for me, they ministered to me. A friend of mine got my dad and I and my brother on a flight back to Texas, even though it was a Thursday in DC, which is hard to get flights out of town because everybody's flying back home. And landed at the airport in McAllen, and hordes of people were already there. Our house was already full. Somebody had already moved an extra refrigerator to our house and had it full of food because my mom was the kind of person that just attracted people. She was an angel walking this earth. She was an amazing, godly woman who ministered to people day in and day out. And they just knew that it was a tremendous loss for our family, but also for the community. And so, it's interesting because I had an amazing relationship with her. She was my best friend. I talked to her every single day. I know for a fact the last words I said to her were, I love you, because that's how we ended every conversation. I'm grateful that we didn't have a tense relationship. We had a really loving relationship. And I always encourage people, like, there's times I see people frustrated with their parent, or, I don't want to pick up that call from my mom. She goes on and on about something. I'm like, take that call, say, I love you. Give that person a hug. We are not promised tomorrow, and you do not know what the last words you say are going to be to someone. And so make sure they're positive ones, make sure they're encouraging ones, make sure that if you have a dysfunctional relationship in your life where you're not in contact with your family members, your parents, your siblings, that you rectify that, because I can't imagine what it would be like to live with it on my conscience if I was not in a good relationship with my mom. And so for me, ever since her death, I always knew that we weren't promised tomorrow, but it really brought that home. She was 54 in great health, driving to work, and then she was gone. And it made me recognize how important it is to live every moment to the fullest. I mean, I kind of am a person that lives like that anyways, but it's just amplified the way I live my life. I just live out loud because I want every moment to count. I want my interactions to be meaningful. I want to live a life that mattered. There's this thing called a 6-word memoir. And so when I talk about what is my 6-word memoir, if looking back over my life, I want it to be, she lived a life that mattered. Right. So my life mattered to other people and to the Lord. And so I really do embrace that. And so I think that loss, that gap of my mom will never be filled. I mean, I think about her daily. I have her portrait hanging over my fireplace. I talk about her all the time. My nieces and nephews, none of them ever met her. They were all born after she died. And so we try to keep Grandma Sherry alive by telling the stories of her. In fact, just this last weekend, I was with a whole bunch of my mom's family, 18 of her cousins, in fact, for a big family memorial service. And people immediately start telling me stories about my mom. And so it just makes me realize that you don't know what kind of impact you're going to have on somebody's life, right? You could sprinkle some goodness in somebody's life. You can say something impactful. You can encourage somebody, and years later, that can really be impacting them, and that can make a difference in their life. And conversely, negative things that you do and say can also impact people for decades. And so I want to be somebody that impacts people for good and impacts the kingdom for good. And I want people to have positive interactions with me. And so losing my mom in that really tragic way has only served to be a catalyst for good in my life. Obviously, I miss her and I'd rather her be here. But if she's going to be gone, I want to make sure that I fill that gap with purpose and meaning.
That's so good. I appreciate you sharing. Um, were there any things that some people did during that time? Just kind of speaking from somebody who's a friend, surrounding somebody who's gone through that, that really you thought this was really helpful, this was good, do this or don't do this.
Yeah,
Um,
there's some good lessons. I think the number one is filling the practical needs, right? Like, so I mentioned people coming to my house and cleaning out the fridge, people showing up at our house with food, people showing up with toilet paper and paper towels, somebody sending a masseuse to the house, somebody sending somebody over to stay at the house during her memorial service, because apparently there are criminals who will look and see when obituaries and memorial services are and try to rob houses, right? Which is horrible to think about, but it's a practical need. So be there with the practical needs. My college roommate came and stayed for 3 days and just brought me water and held my purse and took care of me. She didn't ask anything of me. She didn't say anything. She just was like literally by my side, filling those needs. People flew in, to be there for the memorial service, even though they couldn't even talk to me or see me because the time was so short. So filling those practical needs. I think the other thing I've learned is that you just never know what somebody's going through. I told this story recently, but when we got on the plane to fly home to McAllen from DC, my brother and I were seated in the back of the plane on the window in a middle seat, and my dad was in the front of the plane in a window seat. And we asked the guy next to us, "Hey, would you mind switching seats with my dad?" And the guy said, "Well, is he in an aisle?" And I said, "No, he's in a window." He said, "No," and didn't really ask any questions. It was kind of dismissive of us. About 20 minutes into the flight, this woman and her daughter came back to the aisle, and they said, "Hey, your dad told us what's going on. Please go sit in our seats."
mm,
The guy had no idea that we just lost our mom. But he kind of didn't ask and was pretty abrupt. And so I try to think of that often, like when somebody's rude or insensitive, or they cut me off in traffic or something happens, I try to just stop and think, I don't know what's going on in that person's life. They might have had a horrible, tragic thing happen to them that morning. And so I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. And so I will always remember that man that said no, he wouldn't switch seats. But I'll also always remember the woman and her daughter that immediately gave up their seats so we could sit next to our dad on that flight home. And so
mm.
be practical with people. And then also just, you never know what people are going through, and try to be sensitive to that and not assume the worst.
Gosh, thank you for saying that. Everybody who's listening needs to hear that as well. And it's just that's so helpful way to live. So well, so back up a little bit. You graduated McAllen area on to UT.
Well, I have a bit of a crooked path to UT. So I graduated from Sharyland High School, which is a little school district outside of McAllen. Rattlers, Fangham is our saying.
That's probably
Uh,
appropriate down
yeah,
there.
yeah. So my parents went to Bible school, but neither one of them graduated from college. And so when it came time for me to go to college, I remember my dad saying, "Hey, that sounds great if you can figure it out." It wasn't a foregone conclusion that I was going to go to college.
Mhm.
And frankly, my public high school didn't have a whole lot of great counseling. They're really just trying to get kids graduated from high school in our area. And so I had applied to only one school, which was the University of North Texas. I don't even know why I applied to go to school there. In my mind, I had this idea that I wanted to go to UT, but I remember my dad saying it was a party school and I wasn't allowed to go there. And so my freshman year, I ended up staying at home, and I went to the University of Texas Pan American, which is now called UTRGV. So I stayed home my freshman year, lived at home and went to school, and ended up being a really good thing for me to kind of get my feet under me, figure out college. And then my sophomore year, I actually transferred to Texas Christian University in Fort Worth. My cousin was going to go to school there. I went on a school visit with her, fell in love with it. They had an amazing communication school. So I transferred up there, but it was really expensive and I was paying my way through school. I remember I had to take out $12,000 in loans for 1 year. And I remember sitting in the financial aid office, my dad sitting with me, and they had promised that they were going to give all this aid. They didn't tell us it was all loans. And he was like, okay, well, we're just going to turn around and drive back to McAllen. I was like, no, I want to go to school here so bad. So I took out the loans, stayed there for a year, and it was miserable. I hated TCU. It was a horrible experience, but I learned a lot about myself. And that's where I got involved in politics. I went to a college Republicans meeting, and there was a woman who came and visited at college Republicans, and she said she was running for Congress and she was looking for volunteers. And so I started volunteering on her campaign. And then I got hired to work full time on her campaign. And from that campaign, I went to work on another campaign. And so while that year was tough, it was really hard. I didn't have a lot of friends. I was working 3 jobs just to get by. And there was not time to be in a sorority or join other fun groups. That experience is where I got involved in politics. And so, I wouldn't have charted the path from Pan Am to TCU. But that's what God had in store for me. And then after that, I actually quit school and went to work full time on a campaign in Waco. And I was working on a congressional race in the 1996 cycle. I was convinced my candidate was going to win. I was going to move to Washington, D.C. and work in politics. And then we lost. And I realized I needed to go back to school and finish college. And then I transferred to UT. So,
Oh my goodness.
so I had this very circuitous route to get to the University of Texas, but it was the right route for me because each step along the way taught me something new, taught me something different. And by the time I got to UT, I was all communication courses, and I had a good solid foundation of academic experience in college. And going to UT was amazing and is so fundamental to things I've been able to do since then. I really think going to UT changed my life in so many ways, but I don't know that it would have been the right experience as a freshman. So I tell people now whose kids are graduating from high school, going on to college, listen, the first stop might not be the last stop, and that's okay, right? It seems like we put so much pressure on kids today to pick the right college. And I'll tell you, my life experience will say that I had the exact right experience for me, and it wasn't something you would have charted out with your counselor in high school.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, she is UT, like football games. Josh went to this little university in Lubbock.
I was going to try to leave it off the table, but
And
he's brought it back. Yeah. Yep.
Almost half of our interviews, I bring in UT versus Texas Tech. And so this is the first time I've had someone on my side.
Yep.
Well, Josh,
I'm glad too. I'm glad.
I had no idea how much Red Raiders hated Longhorns until I went to a Tech game a few years ago with a friend, and I wore black and white. I did not wear burnt orange, but we were tailgating, and at the UT OU game happened to be on at the tailgate. And I walked in, and somebody mentioned that I went to UT, and the place went silent, and they all turned around and looked at me. And then we went inside the stadium, and I said, "Oh, this is so cute." And they're like, "This is we don't like y'all." Well, it's a petite little stadium.
I can't. I just want to apologize for anything that my fans may have said wrongly or inappropriate, because I can't say that we're right all the time in how we act. So
it's all in good fun. But no,
yeah.
Going to UT was so important to kind of my career path. Honestly, most of my professional roles since that point in time have been connected to being at the University of Texas and being a Longhorn alum. And so there's something about going to a big school where you have a big alumni base, and people that are immediately going to be supportive and encourage you just because of that connection. And I found that to be incredibly valuable throughout my professional life.
Absolutely. Well, so you got involved in politics while you're in TCU then. So during your UT experience, were you just heavily involved in, were you already involved in politics at that time as well?
Yeah,
this is
so
all kind of.
I think back to like, when did I really kind of start to get involved in politics and public policy? And I will say that, my parents voted. They weren't particularly political. I always knew that voting was important and civic engagement was important. I think about it as public service and volunteerism as what they taught us to be really focused on. But I had a teacher in high school, Mrs. McLeish. She was my government and English teacher. And she really pushed me about politics in general and civic engagement overall. She was tough on me. And I remember her pushing me. And I always thought it's because she didn't like me, because I was telling her I was a Republican. I knew she was a Democrat. And she pushed and challenged. And at the end of the year, I think it was my junior year, she gave me the Social Studies Student of the Year award. And that's when I realized she was pushing me because she knew I was smart and knew I cared, but she wanted to make sure I understood what I was talking about. And I wasn't just adopting my parents' positions or values, but I was able to articulate them on my own. It was such a good lesson for me. And so I always kind of had that interest early on. And then the political experience at TCU and working on campaigns just solidified it for me. The whole hard work that goes into campaigning and the shoe leather that people put into running a campaign and visiting with people and talking about their values was so important. But I did get a little turned off after we lost our race. So when I went to UT, I didn't really get involved in politics. After I graduated from UT, I worked at a high-tech PR firm in Austin for a couple of years. But slowly I started to realize I loved the communication aspect of it. I knew I was really good at communicating, but I wasn't passionate about tech. What I really wanted to be involved in was public policy. And I had several friends from UT that had moved to DC. And I was talking to them throughout the couple of years I was here in Austin after college. And they said, you need to be in DC. You've just got to come up here and work in DC. And so I kept trying to get a job. So I was applying for jobs, faxing my resume to offices on Capitol Hill. And I couldn't get a job. And finally somebody said, you just need to be here. You've got to come up here. And so I planned, I remember it was the summer of 2001. I went on a missions trip to Africa. I went to Botswana, and we were in Botswana, 100 miles from the nearest paved road. And every night we'd sit around a campfire and look up at the stars, and they were magnificent because there's no light pollution whatsoever, and because there's no electricity. And I remember sitting out there and very clearly hearing from the Lord that I was supposed to move to DC. I was praying about it, and I wanted this kind of big, clear signal that I was supposed to go, and I got it. So I came back from Africa and I told my dad, hey, I'm going to move to Washington, D.C. And he said, no, you're not. I said, no, I heard from the Lord. I'm going to move to DC. He's like, God didn't tell me that. I said, well, you're not listening. So I told him, go pray, because I wanted to have that affirmation. I mean, obviously I was a grown woman. I could do what I wanted, but I wanted the support of my family. So eventually he got with the program. And I planned to move September 29th, 2001. That was my moving date. So September 11th happens. My dad calls me. He said, you are not moving to Washington, D.C. And I said, Daddy, we can't let the terrorists win. I was already speaking the talking point. So eventually, 3 weeks after September 11th, my dad and mom drove with me to Washington, D.C. I quit my job in Austin. I had no job in D.C., but my little brother was in the Air Force, and he was stationed right outside of D.C. And so I went and moved into his basement and pounded the pavement and dropped off my resume on Capitol Hill offices. I dropped off my resume in every member of Congress office, including Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison's office. And I got a call back from her office. They said, hey, would you be interested in being the senator's speechwriter? And I thought, sure, why not? I mean, I thought I was going to be press secretary. I knew I would do something in communications. I never really thought about being a speechwriter. But they said, look, we looked at your resume. You went to UT. The senator's a Longhorn. You're a woman. She's a woman. You've worked in politics before, and you have a communications background. We think you could be a great speechwriter. So I went in and interviewed for the job. And they said, you seem like a great culture fit for the office. Now go write a speech. Let's see if you can write. So this is one of the things about communication. It's a real practical skill. Like you either can or you can't. So I went home. I spent a week working on a speech. I turned in the speech, and I guess it was okay because they hired me. So, that was a big, huge leap of faith, right? Quit your job, 25 years old, move across country. I didn't have a job. I started working at Ann Taylor at the mall. And I thought, a couple months in, I was like, okay, I know God wanted me to move. I don't think he wanted me to move here to work at Ann Taylor full time. But I got that job 3 months into the move, and it was phenomenal. I had a wonderful, wonderful experience. And it was a senior role at 25 years old on the senior senator's staff. And it was just a tremendous experience to get to serve the people of Texas. When people say, what are you doing today? I would say, I'm working hard for the people of Texas, right? And it was an honor and a privilege, and really gave me insight into what it's like to be a public servant.
I love that. I do. I was going to ask you about that. I mean, people just don't move with no job. So I'm glad to hear that was the Lord's guidance. But do you have that first speech that you wrote by chance?
It's funny.
Okay, Bailey, do you have it somewhere?
I do. I have several boxes of papers that I saved from that period in time, because I never knew if Senator Hutchison was going to go on to be president someday. I wanted to have boxes that I could give to the archive, give to the library. So I have boxes of speeches somewhere, and I know that it's buried in there. It's also probably in my Hotmail somewhere if I could find it.
Yeah.
But it was a speech to the East Tyler Medical Center. I remember that. It was a real speech that she had coming up. And so I had to think, like, what would she say to this medical audience? What would she say on healthcare, on Medicare, et cetera? And so having to figure out what to write without having to be on her staff was kind of interesting. But also the most challenging thing, and it was the most challenging thing for the full 3 years I worked for her, was coming up with jokes. right? Politicians love to tell jokes, but they don't want to be self-deprecating and they don't want to insult anybody. And really, what's funny if you're not insulting somebody? So that was the hardest part of the job, is finding a joke that she could deliver that would actually be funny. So that was a challenge.
Well, I have so many questions because I mean that world I just have no knowledge of. What was it like to be a speechwriter? Like, what was a daily thing? How many would you have to write? Who would edit it? Was it only you? How long would she prepare before, or she just grab it from your table and go and give it? Like, how does this
Oh my
work?
gosh, so many different questions and
I
lots of
know, sorry.
yeah, no. One of the first things I did was start to listen to her speak. So the person before me had saved all of these little tiny cassette tapes. And I just started listening so I could try to get the cadence of her voice, the rhythm of her voice, the way she spoke. So I'd sit there and just listen to hours and hours and hours. And then I would work with a policy shop. So typically what would happen is the policy staff would say, you know, she has this opportunity to speak to this business audience that's coming up from Texas. And so I would get a briefing paper that said, you know, here's the audience. Here's the last time she spoke to them. Here's how many people in the audience. And then I would sit down usually with the policy team and perhaps communications director to say, what are the core things we need to communicate? And then build the speech from there. And so there were times I would write up to 12 speeches a week. I mean, some of it was quick floor speeches. You know, the senator's going to go down to the floor and give a quick remark on the, you know, on the occasion of some holiday or some event, or a big 20-minute speech for a keynote speech at an event. I would have more time to write that. But it was a fast and furious churning. I actually have a funny story that I tell that is a little bit embarrassing, but I'll tell you as long as you guys don't tell anybody else.
Okay, we'll keep it quiet.
But on September 11th, 2002, somebody came into the office and they said, "Where's the senator's floor speech for the 9/11 anniversary?" And I said, "Well, I don't have a briefing paper. There was a clear process where I'm supposed to get this briefing paper and then I write a speech. I didn't get a briefing paper. Somebody had just forgot to put it in the calendar." So obviously every single member of Congress was going down to the floor, the senator's floor of the House, to give a speech on this 1-year anniversary of this momentous event, right? And so I quickly banged out a speech, like quick, 500, 600 words about, this anniversary and what it's meant to our country and the war that we were in at the time. And I printed it off, gave it to the comms director, gave it to the chief of staff, gave it to the policy director. Everybody signed off on it. So then somebody faxes it down to the cloakroom, which is the room off the Senate floor where all the senators kind of hang out. Senator pulls it off the fax. She goes out to the Senate floor to read it. So all of us have little TVs on our desk. This is kind of before streaming, right? So little TVs on our desk were turned into C-SPAN to listen to the speech. And Senator Hutchison says, the 9/11 anniversary, et cetera, that day when 5 airplanes were hijacked. And everybody just kind of paused because there were 4 airplanes that were hijacked, right?
Oh my goodness.
And 2 into the World Trade Center, 1 in a field, 1 into the Pentagon, right? And so all of a sudden the chief of staff comes up to me. He said, "Did she just say 5 airplanes?" And I'm having just breaking out in hives and sweating. And I look at the speech and sure enough, I'd written 5. The chief of staff had signed off on it. The policy director had signed off on it. The communications director had signed off on it. But we were moving so quickly, a mistake was made. Well, then you very quickly realize how many people sit at home and watch C-SPAN all day, because then the phones start ringing. Did the senator just say 5 airplanes? Is there a conspiracy? Was there a 5th airplane that we don't know? And then the White House calls and says, "Why did the senator say there were 5 planes?" So this is one of the examples of why I don't do numbers. I'm a communicator. I have an accountant. I have a financial advisor. I don't touch numbers because I'm not good with them. And when I went on to work for the Commerce Secretary, we would be putting out press releases about, employment numbers and the economy all of the time. And so I would just put blanks where the numbers needed to go. I was like, I do not want to take responsibility for putting the wrong economic number into this speech. Somebody else is going to put it there. So it was a good reminder for me to double check and triple check, and also to have other people review, and also not to rush, right? So when you wait till the last minute and you rush, you're going to make mistakes.
I feel like that's part of Josh's job description, is that he checks all of my written communication, because I'm not good with that. I just want pictures and cool videos and everything else. The rest of the time, Josh spends probably 20 hours a week alphabetizing and capitalization. And
hey, we all have our strengths. Strengths. It's like, and we need everybody. Everybody has different perspectives. But that to me was one of the challenges. So
that makes me nervous. Yeah, that makes me nervous just hearing that. That makes me almost blush. Like, the panic that she probably felt when she said that.
I thought I was going to
So
get
how
fired
long
for sure. I thought for sure I
would
was.
she? How long would they prepare? Would they just literally grab it and go? They were just good enough, and they've done it
That
enough.
wasn't typical. That was an atypical situation. There are definitely times I remember when she was planning for a big speech. In particular, this one experience where she was roasting somebody. There was a big roast for this media figure, and we would practice. We would be in her office. She would read it out loud. We'd be writing down, editing. She was a big editor. We always joke that she was a frustrated eighth grade English teacher because I have speeches that just have red ink bled all over those papers. But she would practice and prepare, and I would read out loud. One of the things I tell people in preparation now when I help my clients prepare for speeches is to read things out loud, because when we write speeches, it should be written for the ear, not the eye. So something might look good, but until you hear it out loud, you don't realize that there's too many S's in a sentence and you might trip over them, for example, or a sentence might be too long. So I would take the speeches and walk through the halls of the Senate building reading out loud, because it helps make sure that I got the cadence right, that the sentences weren't too long, that I wasn't putting words together that would be complicated to say. And it's a really important trick for people to use, because a lot of times you can write something that looks beautiful on a page, but until you hear it out loud, you don't hear those mistakes or hear the opportunities for mistakes.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I want to get into that when we talk about your business here in a minute. Well, catch us up a little bit. So, in between then, you worked with the national convention with George W. and you did so, and then kind of catching up to 2008. We'll jump around and back to your business. You ran for office yourself, but fill us in on the Republican National Convention and those kind of years and deployment. So it's just kind of a fascinating thing to me.
Well, so I was in Washington D.C. Almost 8 full years, almost a full Bush administration. So I moved up there September 2001, and I stayed till the very last day, January 20th, 2009. We turned out the lights at the Commerce Department and turned everything over to the Obama administration. And so when you're in Washington D.C. and you're working in an administration, you're in tech. There were a lot of Texans in D.C. during that point in time. You get to go serve and volunteer. So when I was deployed as part of the task force to work on the campaigns, when I went to the RNC, those are all volunteer jobs. So you take time off of your political day job to go volunteer at the convention. And there's very clear, bright lines, by the way, right? There should be very clear, bright lines between your government service and your political work. And in this case, when I got the opportunity to go work as a speechwriter at the conventions, it was such a blast. I mean, we had a great time, but I had to take 2 weeks of vacation to go work full time for free. And so first in Minneapolis and then later in Tampa. And so to get the opportunity to go work on speeches for all of the different people that are going to be on stage, in Tampa, as an example, I worked with Marco Rubio. I worked with Susana Martinez, the governor of New Mexico. I worked with Senator Ted Cruz. Worked with Kathy McMorris Rogers, a congresswoman from Washington. So all of these people are coming down to speak at the convention. You're assigned. I probably worked on between 10 and 12 different people's speeches. So you're working with them ahead of time. Then you move down to Florida, in this case for the Tampa convention, to be on site and be on staff, working all day long in the bowels of the big building, working on these speeches, coordinating between in Tampa, it was the Romney campaign, coordinating with the campaign to make sure we're getting the message right, working with, the senator staff to make sure that they feel comfortable. And then once you get the content right, you've got to work with them on practicing. So we had speech coaches that were hired to help prepare them. So I'll use Marco Rubio as an example. He comes in to practice. And for many people, speaking at the national convention is the first time they use teleprompters. And teleprompters are very different and difficult to speak from. It's a whole different ballgame. So you might be somebody who's done a lot of public speaking, but trying to use a teleprompter is just a different mechanism and a different way to speak. And so they would have rooms where we'd practice. And so they'd practice reading off the teleprompter. We'd do that a few times until they felt comfortable. And then they'd go get on stage. And so if you've ever watched, media coverage of the conventions, you see when the big, bold-faced names come up on stage, all media cameras come up and are taking pictures of them and taking video of them practicing on that stage, because it's the biggest stage most of them have spoken on in their life. It's the first time they're using teleprompters, and so they want to get it right. Everybody's there to make the candidate look good, to make sure that the convention is successful and we're able to articulate our message to the American people. But also, it's the biggest stage they've been on. It's important for their campaigns, for their personal political futures. And so it was a real privilege to get to do that and get to work with amazing and talented speechwriters, people I'm still friends with today, because we had those opportunities to work together. And, when you're working on a political campaign or in a convention like that, it is intense. You're working many, many, many hours. It's hard work. But it's also really rewarding. And I think one of the things about being in politics is there's always an end in sight, right? I think that people that work in campaigns, they know that there's an election day and then you get to sleep after that, right? So you get to work real hard until that election day. One of the hard things is after you get out of politics is turning that off, right? Learning how to just okay, it's 5:00. I can stop working. I don't have to go to midnight, And people that worked in Washington, D.C. and particularly have worked around politics are very driven, very focused, very determined, and sometimes I have a hard time turning that off.
Yeah. Oh man. Do the speechwriters get blamed if the speeches don't go over as well?
At the convention, sometimes I will say, there's this, the Marco, if you recall, there's this funny, you can look it up online, right? Marco Rubio paused in the middle of his speech to take a drink of water, which became this funny meme later on. And people were always asking me did you write that pause into the speech? I was like, no, he just needed a drink of water.
You
It
get
was that big
blamed.
of a deal, but it became this big deal. Also, that convention is where Clint Eastwood came out and did a speech. And was really, in my personal opinion, it was awkward and awful, but it was, people were really excited that Clint Eastwood was going to be there. And in fact, they didn't tell anybody. And on the agenda, it had a placeholder and just said CE, and nobody knew who CE was. And so nobody wrote his speech, right? He just did it on his own. And I think it would have benefited from a speechwriter's touch. But there's so many layers of approval and process that it would be really hard for the speechwriter to get blamed. But I'm sure that they could have found a way to blame me. But
Okay. I was just curious. I just didn't know how this works. Okay,
well, I will
so
say one of the things that was funny when I first became Senator Hutchison's speechwriter, it was the greatest job description in the world. Because when you say speechwriter, you know exactly what that means, right? I didn't ever have to explain my job to anybody, but I did have a hard time sometimes explaining to family members why I didn't get credit for it. They're like, why doesn't the senator say, well, Jenifer wrote this speech? I'm like, it's not about me. It's me putting the words on paper for her. It's her speech and on behalf of, the people of Texas. It's not about me. And I will say that when I went to graduate school right after working for Senator Hutchison, and it was a weird shift to all of a sudden start writing for myself, when I had to write papers. It's okay, it's not about what the senator thinks or what her voice is. It was about my voice and my perspective. And it took a little bit for me to get back into my own head.
that's so I appreciate you taking us on the journey. That's really fascinating.
It
What a
was,
story.
yeah,
So
it's a lot of
then
fun.
you come back to Texas, and then at that point, did you decide, it's time for me to do my own business? I mean,
Yeah,
in
well, so
communications?
when I was leaving the administration, I'd committed to stay till the end of the administration, and I thought I might move back to Texas and start my own shop. I'd always had this kind of entrepreneurial drive and thought that would be a lot of fun to work for myself. But I got a call and somebody said, "Would you be interested in interviewing for a job with Karen Hughes?" And Karen Hughes, of course, was President Bush's communications director when he was governor of Texas. Later on, she was counselor to the president in the White House. And she was at a firm called Burson Marsteller, which is a big global PR firm. And she was looking for somebody to run the Austin office for her. And I thought I would be foolish not to interview for that opportunity. So I actually interviewed with Karen in Washington, D.C. We had a great interview, great conversation. She wanted to hire somebody from the administration, wanted to hire somebody who was speechwriting experience. She wanted to hire somebody who knew the University of Texas. She wanted to hire somebody who wanted to be back in Austin. I kind of unique, and somebody who had worked at a PR firm before. So thinking back to the circuitous route I took to college, all of the experiences I had along the way led me to that job. And so the things that I heard that she needed from somebody, I put down in a memo, and I sent her a memo following up after the interview. And I said, I enjoyed interviewing with you. Here are the 4 things I heard that you needed, and here how I'm uniquely suited for those 4 things. And in doing that memo, I showed her that I was a good listener, I was a writer, and that I had the skill set that she needed. And so the best thing I love is that I got an out of office response from her because UT was in a bowl game and she was at the bowl game. And she was like, I'm watching the University of Texas Longhorns at a bowl game. I'll respond in a couple of days. I was like, we're going to get along just fine. And then she hired me, and I worked for her for 6 years here in the Austin office. I was her chief of staff, ran the Austin office, did new business development, ran PR clients, and just was so privileged to learn from her because she's such a fantastic communicator and was just a great boss. And I love my time with her. And about 2014 is when I hit that point where I was like, okay, I'm really ready to get out on my own now. I have the right sets of experiences that I could bring to clients. And I wanted to focus on the things that I really loved, which was storytelling and training. So helping people figure out what their story was and then training them to tell it. So media training, presentation skills training, communications training. So in December 2014, I went out on my own, hung out the Sarver Strategies shingle, and have been doing it ever since.
Oh my goodness. So I'm really interested in hearing more about your business because you mentioned about helping people develop an effective narrative. And it's all business, personal, nonprofit. It's everything and how helpful. Why story? Like, what is an effective narrative? Um, can you define that a little bit? Give us some legs on it.
Yeah, I think what I like to ask people is what are your values and what do you want to be known for, right? And so one of the things I think people struggle with is they often try to over communicate and say too many things. But I'm like, at the end of the day, what is the number one thing you want to be known for, right? As a business, as a nonprofit, as a technology, like what is the one thing, if you had to boil it down to one thing, one takeaway? People are not going to remember everything you said. They're going to remember one thing. What's that one thing you want them to remember? So that's when I started to think about my business. Like, I can do a lot of different things. I do grassroots, we can do websites, we can do social media, I can write speeches. But the two core things that were important to me is like that storytelling and then helping you figure out how to tell that story, right? So it's all about that takeaway. So when people ask me, what kind of clients do you want? I want clients that I can help them tell their story. And so when I'm trying to figure out what that is for clients, I ask them, what do you want people to say about you? Jeff Bezos says your brand is something that people say about you when you're not in the room, right? So what do people say about you? What do people know about you? What do you want them to know about you? Are there misperceptions? So I go through messaging sessions with clients where I ask them a lot of those questions and then I listen, right? So I'll sit around with an executive team and I try to get, when I'm doing a messaging session, a diversity of people in the room. So not just the executive team, but also who answers the phone and who's a volunteer and who's a potential client. So you get kind of a 360 perspective and ask these questions. And you start to realize if I go around a table and ask people, give me in one sentence, if I sat next to you on a plane, what would you tell me that you do? What does this company do? You start to quickly realize that everybody says something different. And if you're not on the same page internally, how the heck is the external audience going to know who you are? So my job is to help you get on the same page internally. And often that's by listening to you, asking you a lot of questions. And then my job is to write that messaging, write that story, and make sure we get alignment and agreement on the story. But I like to use the actual words and phrases that people use. I just was reading a press release earlier today that had so much jargon in it. Could not tell you what this company does, right? And so I want people to strip away the jargon. How do you describe this to your mother-in-law? How would you describe this to your neighbor, right? Don't read me the boilerplate from your website. What's the weekend language that you use to communicate something? And I think that too often people try to be sophisticated in the way that they communicate and they miss the boat, right? Because people just want Senator Hutchison taught me this. She said, Jenifer, I don't need somebody to write beautiful poetic prose. I need somebody to write short, simple sentences that make it easy for people to understand, right? Not because people aren't sophisticated or smart, they're busy. And if you're trying to communicate into their very busy lives, you need to make it simple and communicate in terms that people understand. And so when I'm trying to help somebody figure out their narrative, those are the questions I ask them. What is the one thing you want me to know about you?
Man, I hope people are tuning in. This is a business school degree. Just in communication and marketing.
Right. And I just want to say, see how Jenifer has rubbed off on me in my conversations with you, Josh?
Yeah, I've heard that a lot from him, Jenifer. Like, stop talking. We're lawyers, so we can be the worst at jargon.
Oh, yeah.
Legalese. You know that. So he's helped us bring it down to an understandable level for the
Well,
just normal people.
I do think that some of the most difficult people to train are lawyers and doctors, right? Because they have this just tons of knowledge crammed in your head and you feel like you need to share it all with everybody. I'm like, no. Don't talk to me like I'm a lawyer. This is not a deposition,
Thank you. That's perfect. Well, what are some just practical tips? So somebody has a message. I know you do a lot of presentation training, teaching on how to communicate. what are just some good practical tips somebody could take away on how to present better, how to speak better, just whatever comes to mind, just on helping them move down the road a little bit on this in this area?
A couple things that I think are really important for folks to tune into and to really think about when they're communicating is one, that idea of like, what's the central idea? What's the focus of what it is that you want to say? Because if you don't have clarity around what it is that you're trying to communicate, I'm never going to get it, right? So if I said to you, what's the point of this speech? You can't give me 3 paragraphs. Give me one sentence. So being able to boil down your speech, your talking points, your media to one sentence, right? Being able to really focus down. When it comes to presenting, a couple of things. One is to slow down. I'm a fast talker. I'm trying to always intentionally slow myself down. And one of the ways you can do that is by over articulating, right? So I always think about, I want to make sure to over articulate so you can understand every word that I'm saying. And that also forces me to slow down. The other thing is, many of us use verbal fillers, ums and ahs, right? You hear this a lot from folks. One of the things I've tried to do is to replace those verbal fillers with a breath, right? So if you have a bad habit, I can't just tell you, hey, stop smoking, right? You got to replace it with something. That's why they create that gum, right? So people, instead of every time they want to get a cigarette, they go for that piece of gum. So similarly, if you say or like or ah, train yourself to take a breath instead, which will feel a little bit awkward at first. But what that does is gives you a pause. And we all need to introduce more pauses into our communication. A pause allows me to prepare for what I am going to say next, and it allows the audience to catch up to me. So sometimes people they're speaking so quickly, they're moving along really fast, and the audience has kind of paused and stopped on something they've said a couple of seconds ago. Then they miss what comes next. So replacing ums and ahs with pauses, intentionally putting pauses into your speech so that you will slow down, over articulating. And then when it comes to body language, people will say, "Oh, you use your hands too much." And definitely it's important to use body language to amplify your message. I think it's important to think about your body language as connected to your message, not something separate. So I always want to think about choreographing my body language. So I'm going to say, I'm going to take you from point A to point B, and I'm going to move my hands along the continuum because it's showing that to you as well as saying it to you. We learn in many different ways. So if you need to think about body language, or if you're speaking in front of an audience, think about choreographing that body language so that it connects to your message, and it just gives people one more way to hear and understand your message. Those are some of the simple tips that I try to teach people. Breathing is one of the most important things. People get nervous. Most people get nervous. Many studies show that public speaking is like the number one fear of Americans. And so if you can take deep breaths, calm yourself down, that's going to change your physiology so you can be ready for what comes next. If I tell you to calm down, you're never going to calm down, right?
Yeah.
Nobody ever calms down. But if you take a few breaths, take a sip of water, you can teach your body to calm down.
Yeah,
Gosh, I wish we had so much more time. Micah, sorry, go ahead.
no, I was gonna say, like, I know, I just want to. Those are all super tips. I know you're hyper passionate about getting messages out correctly. I just want to spend it before. I mean, we've already hit our normal time, but I want to keep on going. Just if you have time, just real quick. I know you're also passionate about women in leadership. So I just want to just take a few moments and kind of those. What are some of those things, or what have you seen that is progressing, that we are actually getting more females into leadership roles, business owners, all of those kinds of things? Because I know you're uber passionate about training them, because I follow you. I followed you for a long time, and I know that's on your heart. So can you just kind of like speak into that for a second?
Absolutely. I have kind of 3 core areas that I focus on with my kind of philanthropic time and money. One is civic engagement. Another is helping young people find their purpose and passion. And the third thing is to get more women involved in politics and public policy. There's a lot of things I care about, but I think if you're going to be effective, you need to be intentional about how you spend your time and money. And so those are the core buckets that I've kind of organized my philanthropic and service life around. I think it's important to have more women at the table in leadership positions in corporate America and in politics. because women are over half the country, but we're underrepresented in most leadership positions. And so frankly, our government isn't reflective of our country if we don't have more women involved. Corporate boards are not reflective of the clients that they serve and the customers they serve if they don't have more women involved in leadership. And men and women obviously see things differently, but it's not just about having the women at the table because we need to have that 50%. We bring different perspectives, we bring different life experiences. We collaborate in different ways. We challenge in different ways. We communicate in different ways. And there's, study after study shows that diversity of thought, idea, experience, background makes for better decision making, right? So if we want better decisions made in corporate boardrooms, if we want better decisions made in Congress, we need to have the composition of those leadership teams a little more reflective of the country. And my former boss, Karen Hughes, would give the example of, she remembers being in the White House and they were talking about energy efficiency standards for washing machines. And she looked around the table and it was a table full of men. And she made the assumption that most of the men weren't the ones that typically did the laundry in their households,
Yeah.
which may or may not be true, but let's just go with it's probably true. And she thought, they're not, these are the men who are making this decision about something that they may or may not have any experience with, or may not have the same level of experience that the women did, right? So oftentimes, and Senator Hutchison would tell stories similarly. Standards for mammograms, like men, if all male legislators can't know or understand what it's like to get a mammogram, right? So let's let women who actually have that experience be at the table. So there's lots of good reasons why we should have a diversity of opinion and diversity of ideas. I do a couple of different things very specifically and intentionally to support women getting elected to office. One is I'm on the board of the LBJ Women's Campaign School, located here in Austin. It's a bipartisan school that trains women to run for office at all levels. We had our first class last summer. 3 women from that first class ran for office. One of them won a school board seat in Bernie already, so we already have a good track record. We want women to be prepared to get into that pipeline and run, whether it's local or whether they're running for Congress, to be equipped and prepared and encouraged and have a community of support. There's a lot of research that shows that women need to be asked to run for office more than men for some reason. So we constantly ask. Anytime I'm in front of a group of women, I say, I'm asking you to run for office. Count this as one of the times somebody's asked you. The second thing I'm doing is I'm the national board chair for an organization called the Women's Public Leadership Network. And we're creating a state-based groups that are helping women run for office all around the country. And so we're training them. We have an online curriculum. You can go to our website, Google Women's Public Leadership Network, and our website has resources for women that want to run for office. Men can also download it. We don't discriminate it, but we're focused at women. And frankly, we're focused on women on the center right of the political spectrum. We're a nonpartisan organization, but we recognize that the left has done a really, really good job of recruiting and training women to run for office. The right has not. And so instead of complaining about it, I'm a doer. I'm action oriented, right? I'm not going to sit on the sidelines and complain. I'm going to take action. And so we're training women, we're providing resources, we're creating organizations that are helping women get into that pipeline. Whether you're serving on a board or commission, whether you're on a local school board like your wife is, Micah, that is a pipeline for women to get into larger leadership positions down the road. And so we're just encouraging women to take that step, take that leap of faith. Too often women think they need to have more credentials than they really need. They need to have more experience. They need to do it later on in life. We're saying jump in and do it now, because we want to have a government, we want to have a leadership that is reflective of our country. And we can't do that unless everybody's actively participating.
And I got to give a shout out to my wife real quick. She did become president of the school board for this next coming year. So
good job, Vanessa. I know. Good job, Vanessa.
Awesome. So awesome. And school boards are hard, man. Congress is easy compared to school boards. The politics in a local school board is no joke.
Well, I have to hear about what it was like to run, in 2018 in the primary for, U.S. Congress. So we have time. You got to tell us about that experience.
I always told people that when the time was right, I thought I would run for office. It's something that's been on my heart and something I felt like I was equipped to do. And, I didn't know what the position would be that I would run for, but I wanted to be ready, willing, and able. And so I've been pretty vocal in the last 4 or 5 years about my concern for the direction of the Republican Party. I'm very much a centrist. I'm a pragmatist. I believe in collaboration and working together to get things done, not standing on the sidelines screaming at each other and demonizing people. And so I've been really concerned with the tone and the rhetoric that I've seen, frankly, on both sides of the aisle. But I'll speak for Republicans because that's been my background. And so, I had been pretty public with some of my opinions and perspectives. And so when my congressman, Lamar Smith, announced that he was stepping down for office, I had people immediately call me and say, "Hey, are you going to run? This could be your chance." I thought I would wait till like 2022 after redistricting. But when the opportunity arises, you got to be willing and ready to go. And so the first call that I got was from the Texas Tribune, and they said, "Are you considering running?" And I said, "Absolutely, I'm considering," because I wanted my name to be in that first story of people that were considering, as kind of a trial balloon to see what kind of response I got. And so ultimately, I decided to jump in after a lot of prayer and a lot of consideration with my family and friend network. I'm single. I don't have kids, so I don't have that calculation of a spouse and children that I have to think about or ask. But I did want my brothers and my dad and my close friends to all be in it with me. I knew I couldn't do it alone. And frankly, I did not expect 17 other people to jump in the race. So there were 18 people in the Republican primary. It was a 3-month race that was fast and furious. But I learned so much about myself, so much about my community. I felt so privileged and so blessed, frankly. Not everybody has a good experience running for office and losing. I had a great experience. I ended up coming in 5th place. So for somebody that I beat out a former member of Congress, I beat out the head of the Republican Party of San Antonio. So I had a pretty good showing. But when it comes down to it, there was not the time or money to get the name ID that I needed, especially when you're competing with, millions of dollars in dark money coming into a race, which is a whole different conversation. But what I thought was, even if my path was really steep and the lane was really narrow for me to win, it was important for me to be in the conversation, because I did want to exemplify different kind of politics. I did want to stand for civility. So I talked a lot about civility and collaboration, which aren't winning messages in a primary race, but also need to be told. And so I felt very confident about my run. I knew that if I could communicate effectively and run a smart campaign, win or lose, it was going to be a good opportunity and experience for me. And it's created so many opportunities since then to use my voice and to use my platform to serve others and to highlight issues I care about and to support other women and other people running for office. And, my community came out to support me. People held fundraisers for me. I had people from kindergarten all the way through every job I ever had show up and donate and volunteer and wear t-shirts and knock on doors and put up yard signs. And you just, I finished the campaign, and the one word that I used to describe my experience was I felt blessed. So much so that I went to Vegas the next weekend and got blessed tattooed on my arm.
Perfect.
So, my mother's favorite saying, kind of to circle back to mom, was "blessed to be a blessing," which of course is a scripture. And she lived her life in that way, and I try to live my life in that way. I am blessed to be a blessing to other people, and I'm also so blessed by people in my life. And so I wanted it tattooed on my wrist as a reminder of my mom, but also as a daily reminder of how blessed I am to have a community that supports me, to have people in my life that love me and hold me to account, and were there for me at this really challenging but amazing time in my life.
It's so good. You are promising us on a part 2 on this thing. Well, that kind of segues into, let's land the plane. Do you have a life message that you would say? And we've heard a lot of it. I think we can draw it out, but is there anything that just sparks to the top of your head as far as a life message and or an encouragement to people?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'll just echo a few things I've said. That idea of that 6-word memoir. It's something I challenge people to think about it. You have to sum up the memoir of your life in 6 words. If you did right now, write your obituary, what would it say? And if you don't like what it would say, you have the opportunity to change it. And so, we often think like in regret, like I look back on the things I didn't do, or I should have done, I could have done. You can't change the past, but you can absolutely change the future. And so if you're unhappy with your life, you're frustrated with your life, or you're not living a purposeful, meaningful, passionate, impactful life, you can change it. And so I think in terms of that motto of mine, that memoir of mine, which is "She lived a life that mattered." And a lot goes into that, a life that puts other people first. I have the time and capacity to serve. So I do serve on a lot of boards and in nonprofits. I'm trying to learn to say no, which is a hard thing for me to do. But I want to be intentional with time and with people. I think the last year has taught all of us the importance of intentionality and doing things that we care about and with people that we care about. Right. And so I think, if I were to encourage people, I would say, look at your life. Are you happy with it? Keep doing what you're doing. If you're not, change it. You have the power to do that. You can make changes, whether that's healthy changes, whether that's people in your life that are toxic, whether that's jobs, whether that's education. The world is the world is your oyster, I was going to say, but really, I think that people have more power to change their future than they realize. And, to take those bold steps. I mean, I took a couple of big, bold steps in my life. 1, moving to Washington, D.C. 2, starting my own company. 3, running for Congress. And I did each one of those with intention and with prayer and with support. But they were still big, bold steps. If I had been timid and I had decided I couldn't move across country without a job, I don't know where I would be today, right? And so I feel like it's important to be bold and to take those risks, take calculated risks, but don't be afraid to step into the unknown. And I think that's probably enough for now, but that idea of finally of blessed to be a blessing, right? We get the most out of life when we're serving other people. And so if you're feeling down the dumps and you're frustrated, go out and serve. It'll give you some context. It'll give you some perspective, and it'll put your mind right.
That'll preach. That'll preach right there.
I was about to say the same thing. This podcast, I mean, our whole heart for doing this is to give hope. Yeah. So I hope I know everybody who's listening and who's going to listen to that will just feel that hope coming from you, and I appreciate that. Where you just made me want to kick a door down and go do something
good,
for the good of everybody. So how can we connect with you in your business, and how can people find you and connect with you, Jenifer?
Absolutely. Well, my website is sarverstrategies.com, and I'm on Twitter at @UT_Sarver. So I share thoughts and feelings there, and I'm on all the social channels. It's really not very hard to find me, but Jenifer with 1 N. That's my, the one pet peeve in my life is people misspelling my name. So Jenifer.
Okay. And then if you're a charity, or if you're a nonprofit, if you're just a business, a company, or even a person, Sarver Strategies can come alongside and partner and just have a lot of help and resource and training. And okay.
Absolutely.
We got it.
Yep.
Thank you for making time today. We are so blessed and honored. So thank you, Jenifer.
Thanks so much. I had a blast.
Hey, this is Micah. Me and Josh would like to thank you for joining us in the Storyfield today. We hope you've enjoyed our discussion, and to learn more about us and the Storyfield, visit thestoryfield.com. This podcast is sponsored by the Allen Firm, legal guides for many of life's situations. To learn more about the Allen Firm, visit allenlawfirm.com. Have a blessed day, week, and year, and we will see you next time on the Storyfield.
This is Josh again. I just wanted to thank you for listening and let you know that this podcast is really about hope and about giving you hope for your life. So if you're listening and you're in a place where you're really feeling hopeless right now, or if you do not know Jesus, we have some great news to share with you and would love a chance to pray for you. Email us at hope@allenlawfirm.com. That's hope@allenlawfirm.com, and we'll reach out to you soon. Thank you for listening. God bless you.